At a family dinner, my parents suddenly announced that my nephew would be moving in with me for 6 months. I just listened to their plans. They had no idea I'd already rented out my apartment and moved to another city, and they knew nothing about it. You know how they say family knows you best? Well, in my case, my family thought they knew everything about me, where I lived, what I did on weekends, even what I ate for breakfast. That's why they never saw it coming when I completely changed my life without telling a soul. I'm Alex Morgan, 31, perpetual family disappointment according to my mother's subtle hints at every holiday gathering. 2 months ago, I packed up my Chicago apartment, accepted a job offer in Denver, and just left. Didn't tell my parents, my sister Rachel, or even my nephew Connor, who I've always been close with. Sounds harsh, right? Maybe, but after years of unsolicited advice, surprise visits, and family members just checking in, when I didn't answer texts fast enough, I needed space to breathe. The decision wasn't spontaneous. My company opened a Denver office and offered me a promotion if I relocated. The thought of mountain views instead of Chicago's endless concrete was pretty appealing, not to mention the substantial pay bump. I'd been stuck in a rut, and Denver represented something I desperately needed, a fresh start without family watching my every move. So I did it. Found a decent 2-bedroom with a guy named Marcus who works in tech and owns exactly 0 pieces of furniture that aren't beanbags or gaming chairs. My new boss Stephanie is tough but fair, and for once I feel like I'm building something that's completely mine. No family shadow looming over me, no comparisons to Rachel's perfect life choices, just me, figuring things out on my own terms. I maintained the illusion pretty easily. Kept my Chicago phone number, vaguely mentioned being busy with work during our weekly calls, and made excuses about apartment renovations when Mom suggested dropping by. I was actually getting away with it, until the dinner. My parents hold these monthly family gatherings that are mandatory, unless you're literally on your deathbed. So, there I was, booking a flight back to Chicago for the weekend, rehearsing small talk that wouldn't give away my secret. Little did I know what they had planned. The moment I stepped through my parents' front door in Chicago, I felt like I was walking onto a movie set of my former life. Everything was exactly as I remembered. The faint smell of my mom's signature lasagna, Dad's golf trophies dominating the entryway shelf, and family photos perfectly arranged on the wall like a timeline of Morgan family achievements. Except now, I was an actor playing the role of Chicago Alex, when Denver Alex was my new reality. There he is! My mom Patricia rushed over in her floral apron, pulling me into one of those hugs that somehow manages to be both comforting and suffocating at the same time. We were beginning to think you weren't coming. Her eyes did that quick scan Mother's perfect, checking if I'd lost weight or looked tired, or any of the 1,000 other things moms worry about. Dad gave me his standard clap on the shoulder, the Morgan men's version of physical affection. "Traffic bad?" he asked, already moving back to his sacred spot on the couch, where the Cubs game played at a low volume. Some things never change. "Just work stuff," I answered vaguely, hanging my jacket in the closet and trying not to look too guilty. Had to wrap up a few things before leaving. Not technically a lie. I'd rushed to finish a presentation for Stephanie before catching my flight from Denver. Rachel and Scott arrived about 10 minutes after me, with Connor trailing behind them, eyes glued to his phone. My sister looked tense. That was unusual. Rachel normally enters every room like she owns it, but tonight she seemed off. Scott kept checking his watch and sharing these weird looks with her that definitely meant something was up. During dinner, conversation flowed like it always did. Mom dominated with neighborhood gossip, Dad occasionally grunted approval at sports highlights, and Connor barely acknowledged anyone's existence except to ask for more garlic bread. But something felt different. Every time I mentioned anything about my apartment or work, my parents exchanged these little glances, like they were in on some joke I wasn't part of. "How's that leak in your bathroom?" Mom asked, passing the salad. "Did the superintendent finally fix it?" Section of my water. There was no leak. I'd made that up last month as an excuse for why she couldn't visit. "Oh, yeah, all fixed now," I said, stuffing bread in my mouth to avoid elaborating. "And how's that new project going? The one with the, Dad snapped his fingers, searching for words I'd never actually given him. "It's going great," I replied, trying to redirect. "Hey, Connor, how's school?" But even that innocent question made Scott clear his throat awkwardly and Rachel suddenly become very interested in rearranging her napkin. Something was definitely off, and the pit in my stomach grew with every passing minute. They were building up to something. I could feel it. The careful questions, the exchange of glances, the weird tension. By the time Mom brought out dessert, I was sweating. Did they know? Had someone seen me in Denver? Was this elaborate dinner just a setup for a family intervention about my secret life? As I mechanically shoved tiramisu into my mouth, my dad clinked his glass with his fork, and my heart nearly stopped. "So, Alex," he began, with that tone parents use when they're about to drop something big, "we've got something important to discuss with you." I'll never forget the way my dad leaned forward, elbows on the table, wearing what he probably thought was his reasonable discussion face. That face has preceded every uncomfortable family moment since I was caught sneaking out at 16. "Alex?" he said, his voice taking on that special gravity parents reserve for big life discussions. "You know Connor is finishing up his junior year of high school." I nodded, glancing at my nephew, who suddenly found his dessert absolutely fascinating. The kid wouldn't make eye contact with me, which was weird since we'd always been close. "Well," Mom jumped in, practically vibrating with excitement, "Connor's been accepted into this incredible advanced placement program for his senior year. It's highly selective, only 20 students from the whole state." "That's awesome, Connor," I said, genuinely impressed. The kid was smart, always had been. He mumbled something that might have been, "Thanks," while stabbing his tiramisu repeatedly. Rachel cleared her throat. "The program is at Northside College Prep. It's an incredible opportunity, but..." She exchanged another one of those loaded glances with Scott. "But it's across town from their house," Mom continued, not letting Rachel finish. "The commute would be almost impossible, especially with early morning labs." My dad put down his fork deliberately. "And that's where you come in, son?" The room got weirdly quiet. I could hear the dishwasher running in the kitchen and someone's phone vibrating on the counter. Every single face turned toward me expectantly. "Scott and I have been offered a 6-month consulting contract in Europe," Rachel finally said. "It's career-changing money, Alex. We'd be idiots to turn it down." And there it was. I could see where this was heading like a train wreck in slow motion. "Connor would stay with you," Mom said, beaming like she was announcing I'd won the lottery. "Just for 6 months. Your apartment is only 15 minutes from Northside. It's perfect." "We'd cover all his expenses, obviously," Scott added quickly. "Food, transportation, everything." "Plus," my dad chimed in, "the boy needs a male influence while his parents are away. Someone responsible to keep an eye on him." The irony of my father calling me responsible would have been hilarious in any other context. They continued laying out this perfectly orchestrated plan. Connor moving in next month. How they'd already checked that the program was within my apartment school district. How the timing aligned perfectly with Rachel and Scott's contract. They'd thought of everything. Except, asking me. "We know it's a lot," Rachel said, misinterpreting my stunned silence as reluctance rather than complete shock. "But family helps family, right?" I nodded mechanically, 1,000 thoughts racing through my head. My apartment in Chicago was already rented to a young couple. My job was now in Denver. My life was in Denver. I literally did not live in the state where they were planning to send Connor. "Plus, you've got that spare bedroom you're using as an office," Mom added. "Connor wouldn't be in the way at all." The spare bedroom currently contained Marcus's collection of vintage arcade machines and a hammock. In Colorado. "You two always got along so well," Dad said, grinning at Connor, who was still conducting a silent war against his dessert. "Remember how you used to take him to those science museums when he was little?" I did remember. Connor and I had always connected. He was the one family member I actually felt guilty about not telling. What do you say?" Mom asked, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "Can we count on you?" 5 expectant faces stared at me, waiting for the easy yes they assumed was coming. In their minds, this was already a done deal. I took a long sip of water, stalling, watching my carefully constructed separate life imploding in real time. I said intelligently, "when exactly would this start?" The rest of dinner passed in a blur of voices and details that washed over me while I nodded and smiled at appropriate intervals. Inside my head, though, total chaos. I kept seeing flashes of my actual life. The morning coffee runs with Marcus, the view of the mountains from my new office, the half-assembled IKEA furniture still sitting in my living room in Denver. "We're thinking Connor could move in the first week of next month," Rachel was saying, pulling out her phone to show me a calendar, as if the visual aid would somehow make this impossible situation possible. "That gives you 3 weeks to prepare the spare room." 3 weeks to materialize an apartment that no longer existed? Sure, no problem. I'll just call up a magical realtor and conjure one from thin air. "I don't need much space," Connor finally spoke, looking at me directly for the first time that evening. "Just somewhere quiet to study." His voice had this hopeful edge that made my stomach twist into knots. The kid was actually excited about the idea of living with me. As my family continued planning my immediate future, I kept thinking about the moment 2 months ago when I'd made the decision to move. I was sitting in my Chicago apartment, staring at bills I could barely pay and feeling suffocated by my family's constant presence. The Denver offer felt like a lifeline. I remembered thinking, I need to do this for me, just once. I hadn't told them because I knew exactly what would happen, a family summit to discuss why it was a terrible idea, how I was being impulsive, how I should stay close to home. Now here I was, trapped in a lie of my own making. If I'd just been honest from the beginning. "Hey, Alex?" My mom's voice snapped me back to the present. "Did you hear what I said about Connor's dietary restrictions?" "Sorry, just processing everything," I said, which was probably the most honest thing I'd said all evening. My brain frantically sorted through options. 1. Tell them the truth, right now, and watch my mother have an actual coronary at the dinner table. 2. Agree now and figure it out later. Completely impossible. 3. Make up some excuse about why Connor couldn't stay with me, which would make me the worst uncle and brother in history. "What about your building's policy on minors?" I tried weakly. "Some places have rules about that." "Already checked," my father said triumphantly. "I called your building manager last week. No issues there." My jaw dropped. "You called my building manager?" "Well, we needed to make sure everything was above board before we committed to the European contract," Rachel explained, like this was perfectly reasonable and not a complete invasion of my privacy. I took a large gulp of wine, trying to imagine that conversation. "Hi, is Alex Morgan allowed to house a teenager in his apartment?" "Oh, he moved out 2 months ago?" "That's strange. He didn't mention it. But apparently they'd spoken to someone who hadn't updated their records. Small mercies." "I think it'll be cool," Connor said, giving me a rare smile. "We could catch Bulls games like we used to." That smile was the worst part. For all his teenage attitude, Connor was a good kid. We'd always had a special bond, the kind where he'd text me memes at midnight or ask for advice about stuff he couldn't talk to his parents about. And now, when he actually needed me, I was about to drop a bomb that would disappoint everyone at this table. As dessert plates were cleared and coffee was poured, I realized I'd run out of time. There was no scenario where this ended well. Either I told the truth now and faced their collective wrath, or I continued the lie and inevitably faced an even bigger explosion when they discovered the truth later. "And so we're all set then?" Mom asked, her face glowing with satisfaction at how well their plan was coming together. It was time to come clean. I don't live in Chicago anymore. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't quite exploded yet. 5 pairs of eyes stared at me in various states of confusion. My mother's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. Huh? What do you mean, you don't live here anymore? My dad laughed uncertainly. Is this some kind of joke? I took a deep breath. No going back now. I moved to Denver 2 months ago. I got a promotion that required relocation. I've been living there since March. The silence that followed was the kind you could package and sell as a weapon. My mother set down her cup with a clatter, coffee sloshing over the edge. "That's not possible," Rachel said slowly. "We just spoke last week. You talked about your neighbor's dog barking." "I made that up," I admitted, looking down at the tablecloth. "I've been pretending I still lived here." "Pretending?" My mother's voice climbed several octaves. "Alexander James Morgan, what on earth are you talking about? How does someone pretend to live in a city?" "Pretty easily, actually," I said, a hint of defensive edge creeping into my voice. "I kept my Chicago number. I made vague excuses about being busy. No one actually tried to visit me in person." "Because you said your apartment was being fumigated," Mom erupted. "And before that it was a water leak, and before that—" Her eyes widened as realization hit. "Those were all lies?" Dad's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "You're telling us you secretly moved across the country and didn't bother to mention it to your family? What are you, in the witness protection program?" "I needed some space," I said, which I immediately realized was the wrong thing to say. "Space?" Rachel practically spat the word. "You're 31 years old, not a moody teenager. Adults don't need space from their families." Connor, who had been silently watching this unfold, finally spoke. "So, I can't stay with you?" His voice sounded smaller than it had all evening. That question hit me like a punch to the gut. "I'm sorry, Connor, I don't even have a spare room anymore. I share an apartment with a roommate in Denver." "A roommate?" My mother looked horrified, as if I'd announced I was living in a dumpster. "At your age?" "Denver's expensive," I defended, "and Marcus is a good guy." "I can't believe this," Rachel said, pushing back from the table. "We've been planning this for weeks. We signed contracts, Alex. Connor's program starts in a month." "I didn't know about any of this," I shot back. "You all made these plans, assuming I'd just go along with it without even asking me first." "Because that's what family does," Dad thundered, pounding his fist on the table hard enough to make the silverware jump. "Family steps up. Family doesn't sneak away in the night like a thief." "I didn't sneak." "You absolutely did," Mom cut me off, tears welling in her eyes. "My own son, living a double life. Did you think we wouldn't support your promotion? Were you ashamed to tell us?" "No, Do you hate us that much?" Rachel demanded. "Is your family such a burden that you had to literally flee to another state?" "Duff!" Connor's voice cut through the chaos, surprisingly authoritative for a 17-year-old. Everyone turned to look at him in shock. "Just stop yelling at him, okay?" In the stunned silence that followed, Connor turned to me. "Why didn't you tell me? I thought we told each other stuff." And that, right there, was the question that hurt the most. Not my parents' outrage or Rachel's accusations, but the genuine hurt in my nephew's eyes. "I was trying to do something for myself, for once," I said quietly. "Every decision I've ever made has been influenced by this family. Every job, every apartment, every relationship gets analyzed and critiqued. I just wanted to make one choice that was completely mine." "So you lied to us for 2 months?" Scott spoke for the first time, his voice calmer than the others. I didn't know how to tell you, I admitted, and the longer I waited, the harder it got. Mom was openly crying now. Dad looked like he didn't know whether to yell more or comfort her. Rachel was furiously texting someone, probably canceling plans or searching for alternatives, and Connor just looked lost. What happens now? He asked, looking between his parents and me. Nobody had an answer. The next hour was what I imagine family therapy must feel like. Uncomfortable, raw, but weirdly necessary. After the initial explosion, we all sort of deflated into this strange, honest conversation that we'd probably needed for years. I could stay with Grandma and Grandpa, Connor suggested after a long silence. They're actually closer to North Side than Alex's old apartment was. My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. That's not a terrible idea, Mom admitted slowly. We have the space. Are you sure? Rachel asked, her anger giving way to practical problem-solving mode. Connor can be a bit much with his music and late nights. Hey, Connor protested. What? Rachel shrugged. You're not exactly a quiet roommate. Dad rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Actually, it might work. I've been wanting someone to help digitize my old vinyl collection anyway. Just like that. A solution emerged from the wreckage of my revelation. Not a perfect one, but something workable. The immediate crisis was resolving itself right before my eyes, without me having to magically resurrect my Chicago life. I felt the knot in my chest loosen slightly. I am sorry, I said, looking around the table. I shouldn't have kept it secret for so long. No, you shouldn't have, Mom agreed, but her voice had lost its edge. But we should have noticed something was off. 2 months and none of us actually saw you in person? That's on us, too. And maybe we should have asked before volunteering your apartment, Rachel admitted grudgingly. I guess that was presumptuous. A little bit. Yeah. I couldn't help but smile slightly. Connor leaned forward. So, what's Denver like? Do you like it there? That simple question, actual interest in my new life, rather than judgment, felt like permission to finally talk about it. So I did. I told them about my promotion, my apartment with Marcus and his ridiculous gaming setup, the view of the mountains, my new team at work. With each detail, the tension in the room dissolved a little more. You could visit, I offered. All of you. I don't have much space, but there are some great hotels downtown. The food scene is incredible. I've always wanted to try proper Colorado skiing, Dad mused, surprising me completely. We weren't magically fixed. Mom still looked hurt, and Rachel occasionally shot me glances that promised future conversations about trust and family obligations. But the catastrophic meltdown I'd feared for 2 months had somehow transformed into something manageable. As I helped clear the dessert dishes, Mum cornered me by the sink. Next time something big happens in your life, she said quietly, just tell us, even if you think we'll disapprove. We're not perfect, Alex, but we're your family. I know, I nodded. I will. Later, as I was getting ready to leave, Connor caught me at the door. So, I guess I'll be staying with the old folks instead of my cool uncle, he said with an exaggerated sigh. Sorry about that, I replied genuinely. But hey, I'll fly back for some weekends. We can still catch those Bulls games. Or I could visit you in Denver sometime, he suggested. If that's cool? That would be very cool, I agreed, feeling something warm settle in my chest. Walking to my rental car, I felt lighter than I had in months. The secret was out. The world hadn't ended. My family was annoyed and hurt, but we were figuring it out. As I drove back to my hotel, I realized something important. I'd wanted independence, but I'd confused independence with isolation. You can have your own life without cutting people out of it. Seems obvious now, but I guess sometimes you need a family dinner meltdown to figure out the simple stuff. My phone pinged with a text from Connor. Grandpa's already talking about converting my room into a proper listening lounge for his records. Save me. I laughed out loud in the empty car. Denver was still home. My new life was still mine. But maybe, just maybe, I could make space in it for the people who knew me before I had mountain views and a promotion. That's the thing about family. Sometimes they drive you literally to another state, but somehow they still find their way back into your life, and sometimes that's exactly where they belong.